Hi, everyone. I'm Kalpana Negi. I'm senior editor at the Adroit Journal, and tonight I welcome you all to our issue 49 reading. Thank you for being here. I know it's a weekday at this hour. I know there are so many things you could be doing, but you're with us, celebrating our lovely writers. This reading and this issue is very special because we are going to honor our Anthony Veasna Scholars in Fiction for 2024. So Scholars is a scholarship for all emerging writers who have not published a full-length short story collection or novel. So scholarship it's only in its second year, but we have had such great response, and the fact that we have such a great bunch in this year's winners is sort of evidence of the amazing work so scholarship attracts. Also with us is the amazing and brilliant writer, not a scholar, but an amazing writer, Xavier Prince, whose work we all adored when we first read it. Just to lay down the rules, each writer has 8 minutes to read the works that will appear in this issue of the Adroit Journal, or anything else that they would like to share with us. So without wasting any time, let's welcome our first reader. Allison Field Bell is originally from Northern California, but has spent most of her adult life in the desert. She is currently pursuing her PhD in prose at the University of Utah, and she has an MFA in fiction from New Mexico State University. Her prose appears in SmokeLong Quarterly, the Gettysburg Review, Shenandoah, New Orleans Review, West Branch, Alaska Quarterly Review, The Pinch, and elsewhere. Her poems appear or are forthcoming in the Cincinnati Review, Superstition Review, Palette Poetry, RHINO Poetry, the Greensboro Review, Nimrod International Journal, and elsewhere. You can find her at AllisonFieldBell.com. Allison.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who's here, and thanks so much to everyone at Adroit for this huge honor. It's such a privilege to be in this cohort of scholars and to be part of this journal. So I'm going to read a little bit from my story that's forthcoming in Adroit. It's called Well Effect, and it's from my story collection in progress, which is called Bodies of Other Women. I am a good student. This is just something true about me. Even as an adult, I yearn to please. I want the teacher's praise, not of approval. But right now, I am not a student. I am a patient. My aunt says the key is honesty. I don't want honesty. I want everyone to clap for me in group. I want to smile with my fat, full binder and tell them that today will be better than yesterday. My aunt says you will ruin yourself, Alice. Yes, Alice, like in Wonderland, except the place I am in is not so wonderful. The place I am in is of my own making, a room with no door, or maybe the bottom of a well. All that damp and dark, those seamless, slick sides. Let me start over. I live with my Aunt Alice. It's confusing. Our name's both Alice, double Alice. I am named after her, Aunt Alice, Alice. I am named her. My mother never could have predicted the situation we'd be in because my mother never could have predicted that I would need to live with Aunt Alice. But Aunt Alice was kind enough to take me in. I'm 35. I shouldn't need taking in. But when you're 35 and bipolar, sometimes you need taking in. This is what I rehearsed for my first day of group. I'm 35 and bipolar, and when you're 35 and bipolar, sometimes you need taking in. I thought it sounded very manic pixie dream girl of me. A little old, maybe, to be considered a girl. Manic pixie dream woman, if such a thing exists. Except I don't think the manic part of the manic pixie dream is meant literally. No one actually wants manic. I was manic until I wasn't. Now I'm at the bottom of a well. My aunt lives in California. Everyone hears California and thinks I won the place lottery. And it's true, there are worse places to be. She lives in a small town north of San Francisco, where there are many vineyards and the ocean is only a short 20-minute drive away, Sebastopol. I know the town well. I'm here and I grew up here. My parents moved away to San Francisco when my twin brother had a baby, and the thought was the city might be too much for me. Too many buildings, too much noise. I needed quiet, and my aunt has quiet. My uncle isn't around much. He's working a job up in Lake County, so he comes around some weekends, but says he doesn't want to interfere with our projects. I am our project. Sebastopol is fine, except before Sebastopol, I was living all the way in Tucson, Arizona. That's where my life still is, where my job was, where my house was, my chickens, my friends, my lover, everything. And besides that, I love the desert. It's late summer and the monsoon should be rolling in, clouds casting shadows across the landscape, water driving into the parched earth, leaving the desert with that fresh, clean creosote smell. Instead, I'm here. Summer means the beach is crowded and the fires are coming soon. Not that any of that matters for me. My summer, a series of doctor's appointments and hours spent across from a therapist. My summer, the program, our project. My first day in the program, woman at the front desk hands me a daily check-in sheet. She says, "You fill this out every day." I say, "Is that why it's called a daily check-in sheet?" She does not laugh. She shows me to what looks like a small classroom. I am a good student. I fill out my check-in sheet. It asks questions like, did you take your meds today? Did you eat breakfast? How many hours did you sleep? Yes, yes, 10. I cross out 10 and write 9. 10 seems excessive. More people trickle into the room, of all ages. It alarms me to see older people here, and younger people too. I like to think of depression as something you grow out of, and also something that doesn't plague such a young person, 18 and already at the bottom of the well. The facilitator walks in, looks at her clipboard, and looks at me. "Alice?" "Yes, that's me," I say. "Did you get one of these?" She hands me a daily check-in sheet. I hold up mine, completed. "Ah," says the woman, "teacher's pet." I blush and stare down at the table. "I'm Cat," she says, "and this is my dog, Gunky." Sure enough, a mop of a white dog starts nosing around my tote bag. I try to absorb the cat-dog situation seriously, while also willing my cheeks pale. It disturbs me that therapists are allowed to bring their dogs to the program. It disturbs me to know that therapists have dogs. I don't want to know anything about therapists that make them more human. If they're human, that means they make mistakes. I don't want a therapist who makes mistakes. After Kat's introduction, a few other patients look at me on the sly. They're curious. One older white woman says her name is Sadie. She says, "Get ready, this stuff is hard." An older Black man, who I later learned is named Devon, says, "It's like a colonoscopy." Sadie says, "Like the day before a colonoscopy." Devon says, "A colonoscopy of the brain." They both laugh. Second day in the program. My binder is not stuffed fat and full like some other people in the program because I've only had 2 days to collect materials. The expectation is the fuller your binder, the better your disposition. I want a full binder, but I also want to impress them with my disposition. "Look at Alice," I want them to say. "Binder only a quarter full and her mood's already at a consistent 8. That's the mood scale. We rate our moods every morning, the daily check-in sheet. I can't help exaggerating mine. When I'm a 6, I'm really a 3. When I'm a 5, a 2, and so on. The problem is I don't look like a 6. I look like a 3. It's just so difficult to take a shower some days and to pull on jeans, and there's no way in hell I'm even touching mascara or a hairbrush. I get it, I'm a liar. I'm not unaware of the situation. I'm self-reflexive. And also, at least this is positive thinking. If I say to myself and out loud, I'm a 5 enough times, maybe I will at least be a 4 by the end of the day. Maybe not. My aunt and uncle's house is on Olson Avenue. It's a small country house, and maybe someone from the city would say it needs new siding here or flooring there, but I love it. The house is my childhood. It's a small 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom with lots of plants and fish tanks and a working fireplace and a large backyard with lots of garden. The first day I arrived, my aunt had put a vase of flowers in the bedroom where I'm staying, my older cousin's childhood bedroom. The flowers were from the backyard, sunflowers, zinnias, roses. The roses smelled like roses, heirloom roses. I noticed the flowers, yes, but it was like noticing them through a camera lens. Like I couldn't quite feel they were in front of me. They had some kind of filter on them, or they were kept at a distance, or they were blurry, or I was. I have since learned that this is a phenomenon of depression, the depression filter, the bottom of the well effect. Day 5. After check-in, I am assigned a group to learn a DBT skill, dialectical behavioral therapy. I'm thrilled because we are getting a new worksheet for our binders. The handout has 2 concentric circles. One circle has the words reasonable mind, and the other has the words emotional mind, with the center overlap, wise mind. The goal is to get to wise mind. The process is mindfulness. The therapist leads us in a guided meditation where we think of a decision we made in the past few days. What mind were we in? I think about how I decided to purchase a pair of earrings. I don't need new earrings, and I don't have any money to purchase earrings. Still, I purchased the earrings on a credit card. I was an emotional mind. Almost all of us were an emotional mind when we made our decisions. Of course we were. We're depressed. The therapist then helps us reimagine the scenario in Wise Mind. We play along, mostly. In Wise Mind, I don't purchase the earrings. One woman, Jessica, does not play along. She has her eyes open the whole time. I know because I opened my eyes briefly to check. She's staring at the table. She's too depressed to play the mindfulness game, to play the good student game. She thinks this is all bullshit, and why isn't she just in bed under covers with the lights off? Or maybe she just doesn't like closing her eyes in a room full of strangers. The lover I left in Tucson, he was a good man, Fernando. He tried to help for weeks. I was unmanageable. He wasn't just a lover, we were partners. We talked about marriage, children. He wanted the marriage, the children. I wanted him. And then the mania hit. It started small, a few creative projects. I started painting. I began a novel. I purchased expensive photography equipment because I figured I might as well have a side hustle. He was supportive until the photography equipment. It was all my savings plus some on a credit card. He didn't understand how I could be so reckless. I snapped at him. Then I slept around on him a lot. With men, with women, with whoever looked at me at a bar. I went to bars. I stopped going to work. I worked at a nonprofit, a good environmental one. They were lenient with me. They entered PTO for me. They didn't want to fire me. Fernando made excuses for my absences, told them I was sick, which wasn't a lie. Eventually, they placed me on leave, a soft firing. At least this is what Fernando told me after I arrived in California. I didn't know or care or hear what was said to me in Tucson. In Tucson, I drank mezcal and fucked like that was my job. Fernando was not mad either when I stopped fucking and crawled into bed for a week. Downward spiral commenced. He called my parents. They came to Tucson. They guided me into a car and took me away from the desert. Then I walked into my aunt's house, into the room with the flowers, the roses that smelled like roses. I remember that smell, that floral perfume, a shock. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison. Our next reader is Basmah Sakrani. Basmah is a Pakistani-Canadian writer whose narratives explore displacement, diaspora, and loss. A finalist for the 2023 Kinderkrump Short Fiction Award and the 2023 Craft Short Fiction Prize. Her work has also appeared in Best Small Fictions 2022, the Baltimore Review, Split Lip Press, Past 10, and other journals. Basmah is the fiction interviewer for the Main Review and works in advertising in the New York City. You can follow her on Substack. Basmah.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you all. So I'm going to be reading from the piece that is forthcoming in the Adroit Journal. It's called Firecrackers. Aziz did not believe in fortune tellers. So when Heather told him about a hat padnewala who sat at Abdullah Shah Ghazi ka mazar, who knew your future before you even set foot on the hill of the mausoleum, Aziz scoffed. But it's true, Yar, I'll show you tonight, Heather said. The two sat kneeling with their arms raised, right outside Father Stephen Raymond's door. They had been caught yet again setting off firecrackers in the bathroom. Keep me out of your schemes, Heather Bhai. They all end up here anyway. Aziz angled his head towards the door-marked principal. This is unreal, Aziz. This guy, you'll see him and you'll understand. Heather trailed off. Behind Aziz, their English and geography instructor was turning into the hallway. Oh, here comes D'Souza. Aziz shook his head at Heather. Beta, tum to gaye. You're going to get us kicked out. Abechal, they won't kick me out. They love me too much to do that, Heather said. It was true, Aziz knew. Despite Heather's penchant for trouble, he was charming and well-liked by everyone. Aziz had seen this firsthand in his own home, the way Abu chuckled at Heather's comical retelling of Aziz losing a game of carom. Even the strict fathers at school, they took a gentler approach with Heather. Aziz knew why everyone behaved this way with his cousin. It's because Heather was orphaned by the partition only 2 years ago. Young man, Father D'Souza called out. He walked swiftly towards them, white robes sweeping the ground. He stopped in front of Heather and frowned. What have you done this time? Nothing, Father. I'm just here to wish the principal a blessed day, Heather said, smiling innocently. Next to him, Aziz groaned. His arms ached, but dropping them even an inch would swiftly result in a caning that left welts on your shoulder for at least 7 days. Heather, my boy, you may jest all you want, but when will you think about your future? We have seen the seasons of canoes come and go. 1948 became 1949, and now we are nearing the start of another summer. Graduation is a mere 2 months away, and 30 educated young men will cross the St. Patrick's gates and step out into the world. And yet still, young man, you will remain. Father D'Souza peered at Heather over the silver-rimmed glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. He sighed deeply and crossed his arms. You have failed again, Heather. Heather didn't smile this time. He kept his gaze lowered and remained quiet. He knew D'Souza expected him to show some remorse, to view this repeated failure as a grave disappointment, but it wasn't really, not to him. After all he had lost, missing out on some points in an exam meant nothing. Have you no shame, young man? Look at Aziz, your own kin, and learn from him. He topped his class again. Though the boys couldn't see each other, Aziz felt something shift in Heather. It was as if the air around them became heavier, like it was pressing against them. People often compared them. Heather was the friendly one, the jovial jester who, despite losing his parents so very tragically, always lightened up the room. His rebellious streak was tut-tutted, but it was adored. Aziz was the one with the future, the parents and good grades that foretold stable employment. When people talked about them, Aziz smiled along, and Heather pretended not to listen. It was too much for him, these past remarks at school, at home, even at the mosque after Jummah namaz. All these people reminding Heather of what he couldn't be. Sorry, Father, muttered Heather. Father D'Souza knocked on the principal's office door. The boys are ready for you, sir. Then he lifted his robes and walked away. The boys remained kneeling, arms still up over their heads. Heather looked at Aziz. So you'll come with me tonight, won't you? It was Thursday night in Karachi, and devotees of Abdullah Shah Ghazi were gathered at the Sufi Saints Mausoleum in Clifton to celebrate and pray, as they did every Thursday. The mausoleum was a modest mud and brick structure sat atop a hill. In the decades that would follow, it would transform into a large building with a green dome, beautified with white and blue marble, a stairway decorated with flags and buntings, and a central courtyard to house flower and food stalls. Outside the mystic's tomb, Heather and Aziz stood at the edge of the crowd. Aziz was winded after the climb up. He was irritated at himself for indulging Heather's whims yet again. He must be here somewhere, said Heather. He scanned the crowd for the palm reader, who was said to be dressed in a red kurta and sporting a meter-long orange beard. How reliable this description was, Heather couldn't say, since its source was Daoud, the Shakarkandi hawker, who slept on his cart outside St. Patrick's and didn't know the difference between chaat masala and kala namak, and often overused both in the smoked sweet potato snack he sold for 20 annas during break time. Let's go soon, Heather Bhai, Aziz said. I don't want my future told. You just do yours and then we'll go. Just wait, yaar. Heather wasn't prepared to leave anytime soon. Not until he met the palm-reading fortune teller. He was determined to understand once and for all if there was anything in his future that was worth working hard for. And despite his no-nos and his chalo-chalos, Aziz too was curious about the fortune teller, but he didn't know what to expect, and that unsettled him. The thought of someone else knowing how his life would unfold made his stomach somersault up into his throat. So he decided, as he typically did in situations that asked for a shred of bravery, to simply observe. A group of men stood outside the marigold-laden shrine doors. They were waiting for their turn to go inside and pay their respects to the Sufi saint, to tie a piece of thread in the interior latticed windows, a way to express a deep desire or share a dilemma for the late mystic to manifest or resolve. None of these men looked like Heather's fortune teller. In the foreground of the shrine doors, families sat in pockets on the hilly ground. There were women praying, eating, talking, chanting, draped in flowery dupattas, head covered, some rocking back and forth, looking up at the shrine. Children ran around barefoot, their eyes rimmed with kajal and bellies full and sated from the biryani that was distributed here every week. The air carried a layer of smells that settled on the skin. Chicken korma, jasmine, feet, and incense. In the distance, a white billboard for Tibet snow cream glowed like a beacon in the dark, cloudless sky. They weren't close enough to the sea to hear its waves, but Aziz could taste its saltiness on his tongue. Flies buzzed around, and though the night had cooled somewhat, Aziz was sweating. Just as he was about to tap his cousin on the shoulder, Aziz spotted the fortune teller and announced, "Milya, haath parne wala milya, chalo." Heather lunged ahead. He snaked around a picnicking family, dodged a woman in a burqa, reaching an arm out for help as she climbed the hill and made his way towards the other side of the slope. His baggy black kurta ballooned behind him as he ran, and Aziz, who was in step behind Heather, watched his cousin's shoulders whip side to side as he pushed past devotees to reach the fortune teller. The Haath Parne Wala sat on a rock on the side of the hill occupied by only men. There were no signs calling out this distinction, just a cultural understanding and unsaid awareness that this was where the Malang sat, the extreme devotees who swung in a trance induced by ultimate piety, by hashish, or both. This wasn't a place for women and children. Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you so much, Basma. That was amazing. I felt like transported to South Asia. Honestly, it made me miss home for sure. Our next reader and scholar is Cristina Fries. Cristina is a Colombian American fiction writer. Her work has appeared in PEN America Best Debut Stories 2018, Michigan Quarterly Review, Epoch Literary Magazine, Action Spectacle and War, Literature and Arts. She's a recipient of PEN Dow Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers, a Fulbright Scholarship, and a Tin House Scholarship. Her operas have been performed nationally, and she lives in San Francisco. You can find her on CristinaFries.com. Cristina. I'm sorry, I got your last name wrong once. It had to happen. I'm sorry.
It had to happen. It always happens. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. It's really special to read before a group of people. I'm going to read the short story from the Adroit Journal issue. It's called The Anita's Spiderweb, and it's going to be part of my forthcoming short story collection, or short story collection in progress, I should say. And that book is called Don't Leave Cecilia. And this story is, it's told with two different first-person narrators. And when there's a new narrator, I'm going to say who the narrator is. It's titled after each narrator. Okay, The Anita's Spiderweb. Her mother. 2 weeks ago, I woke up to the morning darkness thinking of my daughters. It was 5 a.m., too early for them to be awake. I stepped outside and stared at the cows blanketed by fog in the fields. They turned to me, and all at once they brayed, their cries the sound of my own suffering. To my east and 15 kilometers away, Herrera's lights freckled the early dawn, my children living alone beneath their glow. I comforted myself with my sight, which allowed me to be in two places at once. While spanking the haunches of a cow with a stick to lead her to the milking stalls, I glanced also into the Anita's life. From above, I could see the downturned curve of her nose, the smooth skin on her arms, her open, drooling mouth pressed into the pillow beside her older sister, Clara. I felt weightless, as if I were hovering just above her head. Then I turned my attention back to work, to the wiry hairs growing from the cow's udders, the hot milk steaming in the metal bucket below. After the morning sun grew brighter and the fog had almost cleared, I stopped milking for a moment to watch my girls again, who would be waking up soon. This was my routine, and this was theirs. Groans of protest against the daylight, which promised homework and chores. When the Anita stood up, I could see the rest of the house, the large bed they share, the tiny kitchen with a view of the street. The house was a mess, clothes on the floor, dirty dishes in the sink, what to expect from two girls living alone. I had moved out when I started this job in the Campo 3 years ago. From here, I mail them the money so they can live in town and go to school. As milk filled the bucket between my knees, Clara made breakfast and handed Dianita an arepa, who wiped her greasy hands on the bed sheets. Stop greasing up the sheets, Clara said, and threw Dianita's half-eaten arepa in the garbage. Although I'm always astonished at the incessant pull of their growing bones, I'm even more surprised when I find newly sprouted attitudes branching out of their personalities like limbs threatening to tip them over. After a wistful glance at the garbage, Dianita washed her hands. No protest, not even an impulse to say, hey. She'd learned over the years that her older sister would always yell louder, push harder, knock her down if ever she were to fight back, but her submission to Clara's short fuse worried me. I kept watching them get ready for school, wanting to see what thorn had pierced through them both. I am their mother. I deserve to know. The cow kicked at the dirt. There was no more milk left to squeeze. I spanked the next cow into her stall, and by the time I looked again at my daughters, they'd already run off to school. Clara had left Dianita many paces behind, not wanting to be seen with an embarrassment or a burden of a sister wearing pigtails. I felt that abandonment too, Dianita. I felt it not so long ago when your sister shut me out entirely. Dianita. Our mayor installed the PA speakers all around Herrera years before I was born, I was told, the way old people always say that sort of thing to make you feel young and stupid. But no matter how people tried to make me feel, I understood the world just fine. My whole life, the mayor's voice on the PA speakers was like God. Each morning, he'd tell us about the day's events to come. Go to the plaza at 8 p.m. for a lechona roast, or get your carrots in the mercado today, or bingo tonight outside the Iglesia del Santísimo Dios. If I was in a bad mood, I wanted him to shut up about those bingo nights, which we already knew would happen every Thursday night. But most of the time, I liked the way his voice floated in through the clay walls of the house I share with Clara, a voice like a friend or a pet that fills an empty space you forgot was there. But 2 weeks ago, the mayor's voice was replaced by a stranger's hiss. That day, Clara and I were doing homework after school with Gwen, her friend with hair so blonde it hurts to look at in the sunlight. I liked Gwen because she was nice to me when Clara wasn't. She braided my hair when Clara was grumpy and overwhelmed with the problems she seemed to be facing in her brain, probably thinking about the dishes in the sink, the cooking and cleaning to be done, the homework, or the state of the world. Now our papers were scattered all over the floor, a delicious sight to trample over. But I contained the urge. She would have killed me and I didn't want to die yet, because it was almost nightfall, our favorite time of day, the time of day when we go looking for spider webs. Sometimes when I'd wait for Clara and Gwen to run into the hills for our webs, I understood why time in this town moved so slowly. The mayor's announcements, the predictable as always, caused the people living here to long for some excitement, all of us forcing time itself into a slow stupor of our collective anticipation for the future. I flicked a pencil at Clara, even though she couldn't force the sun to go down on her own. Do your homework or leave, she said. As you wish, I said. So I went outside, which would be more interesting than watching them do math anyway. Still, my chest felt tight when I took one last glance inside, and she did not look up from her work to say goodbye, be good, be safe. At any minute of any day, I could walk outside and find all the same people in the same places they'd always be. The drugstore lady on the corner, tuned in to some radio talk show, the arepa man in the plaza who always chanted the words arepa, arepa, arepa a million times, as though repeating those words would stir in someone a sudden pang of hunger. Even the dogs seemed always to gather on the same street corners to bask in the sun. I sat on a bench in the plaza, watching the vallenato man perform on the church steps. He always smiled shamelessly when he sang about cheesy romance stories, as if he had lived that love himself. His smile, his song, were proof of his truth. His song made me swoon, like he was singing about some faraway destination I could not picture but could feel, breezy, glamorous, and hard to find. My heart was stuck on another planet for the rest of the afternoon. I even bought an arepa from the arepa man, who usually annoyed me with his chant. But as I took the steaming mouthful in my hands, he winked at me and thanked me, saying, "A la orden, señorita," like he'd made this meal especially for me. While I ate, I kicked at some pigeons, watched them fly away. I pet some dogs curled on the sidewalk that were probably covered in fleas, as Clara always said, but I laughed when they blinked and sneezed, revealing their missing teeth. As soon as the sun began to set, I ran home. Even if Clara was mean during the day, she'd be unable to resist the temptation to go into the hills at night to gather spider webs. The webs are sticky and glow at night like something forbidden, and we make things beautiful out of them. We discovered the spider webs last year when Gwen cut her shin on a branch. I didn't know how to help, so I panicked and covered her bloody leg with webs. And although she shooed me off, she came running back the next day. The cut was gone, no trace of a scratch. We discovered that when we put them on our dry skin, we became moisturized. And when we wove them between our fingers, we became artists, our drawings more elaborate and beautiful than any of the things we thought existed in our brains. When I put webs in my hair grows thicker, shinier, even shinier than Gwen's, which always swayed hypnotically when she'd walk ahead of me on our hikes up those steep hills to go searching for more. When I arrived, Clara was lying on the bed, reading from a magazine. Our house was clean, and Gwen was gone. In my head, I promised to help next time, even though she never asked. I sat next to Clara and tried reading over her shoulder. She didn't tell me to stop bothering her. I inched closer. Can we go now? I asked into her neck. Fine, she said, closing the magazine. Clara is my favorite person in the world. As she put on her sneakers, my heart returned from its faraway planet. I felt I could hug her then, tell her about the vallenato singer's song and the dogs with missing teeth, forgive her before she could even say, I'm sorry, I was mean. I could almost hear those words as her face broke into a smile that she could not rein in. That was enough for me. We put on our sweaters, but before we could open the door, the PA speakers invaded our home with its loud static. It was not the mayor telling us that tomorrow there would be another bingo night at the church. Instead, it was the voice of a man who yelled into the microphone as if he had no idea how to use the PA. I could barely understand him. He was talking so fast. He called people to report themselves to the mayor's office. Roberto Jimenez, Jaime Garcia, Mauricio Ortiz, Enrique Piemonte. And then slowly and clearly, he said to the rest of us, no one will be allowed out of their homes past nightfall. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cristina. It was beautiful. Few sentences there that I'm not going to forget anytime soon. Our next reader is Devon Halliday. Devon is a Pushcart Prize-winning writer with short stories published in Plowshares, Ninth Letter, Indiana Review, Fence, Idaho Review, and Tri-Quarterly, among others. She's currently pursuing a fiction MFA at the Warren Wilson Program for Writers with support from Rona Jaff Foundation. She lives in her hometown of Athens, Ohio, where she and her husband own and operate a local bakery. Devon?
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here with such talented readers in the cohort. It's very fun. I'm going to be reading from my story that's appearing in tomorrow's issue called Habit. Every now and then, once every few weekends or so, but never more than twice a month, Nita sinks into nothingness. It's a controlled sink, premeditated, and ends about 6 hours before Seth's car pulls into the driveway and the garage grinds open and shut. He lifts his suitcase out of the trunk and edges his way through the door, and there she is, Nita, smiling in nude lipstick, hair freshly washed, with dinner on the stove or takeout, still boxed up steaming on the island counter. Hi, hun, she'll say, or something like it. How was your trip? And Seth will tell her about the ungodly lines at airport security, or the beleaguered mothers and their squalling, sticky toddlers in the airport lounge, or the absurd construction blocking one of the big arterial highways that connects their suburb to the nearest city. And what about you, he'll say. What have you been up to? Nita has plenty to report. A grant application she's been working late on, thanks to some last-minute ask from one of her least favorite clients. Drinks with Katie, a friend of hers that Seth has only met once and doesn't know by sight. A long walk if the weather was good. If not, a rewatch of some favorite movie. Work, emails, TV. Nita always has more alibis stored up than Seth ever asks for. They carry forward to the next time they're needed. You work too hard, says Seth, massaging her shoulders, his fingers digging in between her bones. There's always a moment, whenever he says things like this, that Nita is convinced he knows. But the moment passes, the takeout or home-cooked dinner is consumed via forks that are then promptly washed, and they sit on the couch together, on their laptops together, doing things before bed, and then it's the next day, and Nita wakes from a deep sleep, comprehensively refreshed. When she thinks of it, which between occurrences isn't often, she thinks of it as her habit. She likes the word habit, the guilty good cheer of it, and how it's close enough to the word hobby that it feels robust with intent, something to cultivate consciously or in which to fondly indulge. Indulge is another good word. Every 2 weeks or so, when Seth leaves on one of his weekend-long work trips, she indulges in her little habit. She starts by listening closely for the scrape of Seth's wheels against the outer curb, the final heavy settling of the garage door into its groove, her head cocked, her heart beating just a little faster than normal. She watches the car pull away. Then she waits another 30 minutes, reads a few pages of something, drips water into an empty glass. There's always the chance that Seth will dash back in for his chargers, his electric toothbrush, his passport. The page turns, the clock hand drops another tick. She takes a sip from her glass of cool water, full to the brim. The 30 minutes thus elapsed, she roots around in the freezer, past the bags of frozen corn for chili and frozen berries for smoothies and frozen beef and lamb from the farmer's market, and shifts out the 2 rolling bottles of vodka from the very back. These she tucks under her arm, and sometimes she skims the liquor cabinet for another bottle or 2 of something to take down. The water glass she carries pinched between her index finger and thumb. Her phone is extricated from her back left pocket and deposited face up on the kitchen counter. Then Nita and her bottles travel down the carpeted stairs to the basement. The feeling at this moment is a cradled one, like a gift she hasn't all the way unwrapped, some soft, heavy, rattling thing nestled in tissue paper. In the basement, under the dimmable LEDs, Nita lines up the bottles along the coffee table. She turns on the TV, the video game console that Seth got free from work, the 2 controllers which she brings to the coffee table too. If it's winter, she burrows under a tangle of shag blankets. If it's summer, she takes off her jeans and sometimes her shirt and reclines against the couch's sticky leather, the AC whooshing down from a vent in the ceiling. The system blinks and blooms onto the screen, and the game asks her if she'd like to start where she left off, lost in a forest sliced by shadows and sun, or scaling a turret high up in the cinematic clouds, or standing at the threshold of a woodsy, dark-lit tavern, about to barter for something she needs. Nita hits play, and the world surges back to life. Over dinner, Seth says, "You should invite Katie over sometime." "Here?" "Yeah, I'd like to get to know her better. Seems like you 2 have become close this past year." "I guess we have," Nita says, thinking back now on the things she and Katie have supposedly done together, the memories they've supposedly made. Movie matinee, wine tasting, winter hike, brunch. "I'll ask her," she says, and Seth nods, seriously, invested in Nita's life or in her performance of it. Maybe her husband will come too. What does he do? I honestly can't remember. Medical research something, not a doctor, but something medical. "Huh," says Seth. The knife cuts the steak, the water glass thumps the placemat. They are facing each other on the left end of the 6-seat table. "I've met Katie? Just in passing, I think." "I'm glad you're spending more time with your friends," he says. "I worried about that when we first moved here, that you wouldn't find anyone." "I know." "Because of your high standards," he says, his fork pointing at her, "not because you're hard to get along with." "I do have high standards," she says, looking up from her plate after a moment to see Seth still considering her with an odd, fond expression. "You're very easy to get along with, actually," he says. "Oh well," Nita says, cutting away the edge of fat that rinds her New York strip. "I try." A bottle of red sits on the island counter, but neither of them has remembered it, seemingly, or risen for wine glasses. It will go back in the cabinet at the end of the night. The kitchen, as they turn off the downstairs lights and climb upstairs to their master bedroom, will be clean. "Did the meeting go all right, by the way, with the new clients?" Nita says, and for the next 10 minutes, the pressure of Seth's attention is somewhat lifted, though again before bed he will regard her with that same curious smile, a smile that suggests she's become a kind of cipher to him, one he's maybe content not to solve. The habit was first a single aberration, isolated and without precedent. Winter at the time, the deep afternoon of another cold, snowless day. Outside, the few inveterate dog walkers were nudging their way past the living room window, bundles of scarves and overcoats and wind-whipped faces. Seth had departed earlier that day for some showy kicking off the year conference in Seattle, a 4-day absence that Nita historically might have filled with her usual social engagements, but this time she hadn't bothered, and Seth, fretting about flight delays and record-breaking meteorological lows, hadn't asked. They kissed goodbye at the door, and Seth drove himself to the airport and texted when he got there. The plane took off at the scheduled time. Going on airplane mode, Seth added. Love you. See you on the other side. Nita received his text on her phone and on her laptop as she sat at their kitchen island in one of their swiveling bar stools. She felt idle, but in an almost electric way. She had promised nothing to anyone this weekend. Seth out in Seattle would be too busy to call her. In their clean, conventional home, she felt suddenly unwatched, as if the cameras had turned off. She opened the freezer and popped out an ice cube and set it between her teeth. The freezer that day was full of vodka from a Christmas party at which their guests had drunk more wine and fewer cocktails than expected. She worked on grinding the ice cube into shards, and she remembered for some reason the video game Seth had most recently abandoned. A lush, enchanted forest game with a gentle, looping soundtrack whose motifs had echoed in her head ever since, just below the surface of memory. There was a quest Seth had declined, something about exploring the mountain caves for treasure or vampires or something. She had liked the look of those caves, fathomless and craggy and well-rendered, but Seth said it was a side quest and not important since he already had the whatever blade from the whatever forge. Nita had shrugged, gone back to her laptop. She never played, only watched. It took her a while to connect it all properly, the console, the controller, the TV, the speakers, but after about 10 minutes, she was settled on the couch with blankets across her lap and a screwdriver on the coffee table, its ice cubes cracking quietly. The Enchanted Forest game prompted her to start over with a new character. Her phone was upstairs charging. As long as it stayed up there and she stayed down here, she could not be held accountable for anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Devon. Best dialogue I've heard in some time. I can say it's beautiful. Thank you so much reading that. Our next reader is Lu Han. Lu is a Chinese-American writer whose work is published in the Adroit Journal, The Margins, Lost Balloon, Had, and elsewhere. Lu is a 2024 Veasna Scholar in Fiction, a 2023 Tin House Scholar, and has received support from the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing, the Lewis Latimer House Museum, the Hudson Valley Writers Center, and Guernica. Her novel in progress, The Rusticated, is shortlisted for the 2023 First Pages Prize in Fiction. Lu lives in New York, where she dreams of climbing rocks and having a dog one day. You can find more at www.helloluhan.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Adroit Journal, for hosting this, and thanks for everyone for being here and spending your Wednesday night with us. I'll be reading the opening of my novel in progress, very much in progress, called The Rusticated, and this will be part of the Adroit issue that comes out tomorrow. The Rusticated, Chapter 1, Jilin Province, China, January 1968. When Ling sensed a familiar warmth spreading on soft cotton beneath her, she was still suspended in a dream. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping to go back to sleep, but it was too late. She had once again wet the bed. At 12 years old, Ling was well past the age that this was acceptable. She had only one thought: she must not wake her father. The moon was strong that night. Despite the drifting clouds, its light shone through the dusty windows, reflecting off the fresh snow on the ground. Ling lifted herself up and looked around at the dark silhouettes in the room. If she remained still, she could hear her younger sister, Lan, breathing softly next to her. The wind picked up, ushering the clouds along and rattling the windows. On the small cot across the room, her father slept, feet pointed toward the window and wrapped tightly in blankets. Ling could just make out the tip of his nose, the outline of his lower jaw, his slightly parted mouth. His face bore a mild resemblance to that of Chairman Mao's, whose statue was erected in Changchun's central marketplace earlier that year, bronze-set expression serious and unsmiling. Ling sat up fully and heaved the wool blanket off. Her urine had begun to grow cold, and she wanted out of the damp sheets. Quietly, she swung her feet over the cot, toes hovering above the slippers. Please. She did not yet think to ask God to stop her father from waking up because she had not yet heard of such a thing. Instead, she prayed to what she could see around her. She prayed to the room she had grown up in, the same one she lived in with her family for all 12 years of her life. She prayed to the pots hanging on the metal hooks, to the splintered wooden furniture, to the moon tucked low in the sky. She begged them to keep her father asleep just this one time. Ling peeled back the quilt from the corner of the bed, careful not to touch the soaked area. Beside her, Lan stirred and mumbled into the air. Ling could see her sister's eyes were still swollen from crying the entire evening. Earlier in the day, their father took the tiny black cat they had only gotten a week ago and, without a word, grabbed her by the neck and threw her out the window. From their second-floor apartment, they could hear her cries as she scampered around the courtyard, looking for an open door, a shed, any crevice to escape the brutal cold that gripped northeast China this time of year. It was a quick few minutes before they no longer heard any mewling. Through sobs, Lan asked their mother if Xiaohu was dead and frozen by now, like the mice they found curled in the corners of the courtyard. Their mother kept her eyes cast downward, her only response to continue swishing her hands in the pot, rinsing and re-rinsing uncooked rice. It was Ling who spoke up. Mei, little tiger will be all right. She's probably back with the woos. Ling pulled Lan close to her and smoothed her hair. They have more mice than we do, she continued. Can we blame her for going to them? The Wu children have chubbier cheeks that the mice like better. Ling pinched her sister's cheek, finally drawing out a tiny smile. Ling would take it. She would take any bit of relief she could find for Lan. A week earlier, Lan had jolted the family awake in the middle of the night, her shrieks piercing the veil of Ling's deepest sleep. In the dark, a mouse had found its way onto her bed, nibbling at Lan's lip as she edged on consciousness. The next day, Ling marched to the woos in the neighboring complex with a small sack of cabbage-stuffed baozi and returned with a tiny ball of fur tucked into the crook of her elbow, a feisty runt that seemed to pick Ling as much as Ling chose her. Ling allowed Lan to choose the name, and so she was called Xiaohu, Little Tiger. They watched her bound from one corner of the room to another, seemingly more curious than predatory upon encountering a mouse. Ling worried that Xiaohu's killer instincts would never emerge, but since she joined the family, Lan slept more easily, pulling the small warm creature into her arms each night. Ling watched the two curled into each other, sound asleep, and felt a swell of pride in her chest, knowing she did this for her sister. But that was yesterday. Today, Xiaohu was gone, and Lan had finally mercifully found her way to sleep. The smile Ling wrestled earlier from her sister had long faded. Lan's lips were dry, her cheeks tender and salt-streaked in the moonlight. Ling wrenched her eyes away from her sister's face, so small and perfectly oval. There was nothing she could do for her now. Now, Ling needed to focus on the task at hand. She bundled the bedsheets in her arms and made her way toward the wash bin. She stood on her toes and reached for a bar of soap. Once she washed the sheets, she would refill their water barrel with the spigot down the hallway. Ladle by ladle, Ling filled the wash bin so quietly she could barely hear a splash. She was nearly done. And then, a great loud clatter as the ladle was snatched from her hand and flung across the room, water splattering all around the tub, soaking her face and the long threadbare shirt that served as her nightgown, as she knelt, frozen in place, her mouth open and soundless as a fish gasping on land. Ling, her father's voice a bellow in her bones. Have you dirtied your bed again? Her father's iron grip clamped her upper arm, yanked her roughly from the ground. She scrambled to get to her feet, clawing at the sink, the wall, the door frame, anything to regain her footing. You disgusting, useless, filthy dog. Ling's father dragged her to the door, threw it open, shoved her to the hallway where she stumbled and fell upon her knees. Splotches of oil ringed the floors of the hallway where each family made meals just outside their apartments. The door slammed shut behind her. From the first floor, the wind howled and whipped its way up the stairs and throughout the building, piercing every bit of Ling's skin. Ling hurried to a nook in the hallway. It offered no shelter from the cold, only a slight respite from the wind. It would have to be enough. There she huddled, wrapping herself with the soaked bedsheet she realized she still clutched in her hands. When dawn came, the sun rose weak and filtered. In the gray spill of light, the metal door creaked open a sliver. From the corner of her muted vision, Ling saw her sister emerge, eyes frantic as she darted into the hall. Lan ran to her, sobs racking her tiny frame, trying and failing to gather Ling into her thin arms. Ling did not shiver, her entire body numb, skin no longer screaming. She rose slowly, serenely even, as though woken from a midday nap, until she stood upright, stiff as a stalk of corn, jaw clenched and lips the deep purple of bruised plums. She steeled herself as she walked slowly towards the doorway. The sudden return to warmth would hurt the most. Thank you.
Gorgeous. Wow.
Thank you, Lou. This, when you just read it, this hit me as hard as it did when I read it the first time in the queue. It was, it almost made me, it teared me up actually when I read it for the first time, and now it's amazing. Thank you so much for writing it and reading it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our next reader and our last reader for today is Xavier Prince. Xavier is an MFA candidate and nonfiction writer living and studying in Oxford, Ohio. With recent degrees in English and philosophy, his interests are in experimental memoir, Black existentialism, and radical love. He has work published in Scrub, Literary Magazine, Birchbark Editing's Microlit Almanac, and Texas State's Porterhouse Review. Xavier.
Hello, everybody. I want to say I'm really excited to be here, that I feel graced to be in the presence of so many other good writers, great writers. And yeah, I'll be reading my lyric essay titled On the Inward, that will also be appearing in the Adroit Journal. Okay. On the Inward. Nigga. There, it's been said. Now, allow us to run a brief diagnostic. Feel free to write in the blanks if that would be helpful. How does the word make you feel? 2. For non-Black readers, did you read this word in your head? Was it too abrupt for you to take your proper precautions? Do you ever? 3. Do you believe that the reclamation of a slur is powerful or regressive? 4. What do you know about power? About regression? What about egress? What do you know about egress? 5. Imagine you're locked into a shifting black box with slits as wide as an arrowhead. There is one meat pie on the ground shifting around in the dark. There are 10 people crammed in this box. You can't see the pie, but you can smell it. You can hear the 10 scraping across the ground. After they have slung the arrows, do you A, pick them up and use them to poke at your captors? B, turn them towards your captured companions? C, use the blade to ration the pie into 10 different portions? 6. True or false? The cultural influence of rap music marks the decline of the West. 7. Which of these is your favorite Negro spiritual? A, Wade in the Water, God is gonna trouble the water. B, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. C, Runaway, 2010. 8. If words weren't just words and they actually carried power, about how much power do you think the N-word could exert? Feel free to use pounds. However, horsepower may be more appropriate. 9. If your father says, in response to a Snoop Dogg music video on MTV, I hate when people use that word. How are we supposed to get respect as a community if we use that word that tears each other down? And for years, your friend says in greeting, what's good, nigga? How do you go about splitting difference? 10. Imagine you're in a house, alone, in a prairie full of tall, dry grass. Flames are encroaching slowly from all around you. Within a case of glass, a fire extinguisher waits behind a warning that reads, break in case of emergency. Imagine you had a rock set aside for this very moment. Where is that damn rock? 11. If you're eating breakfast after Lyft and a close friend, a white friend, says to you in a quiet voice, it reminds me of that episode of Boondocks where the white teacher says, can a nigga borrow a pencil? And you say, what did you just say? And he repeats it and says in an even quieter voice, I only said this to you because I knew you wouldn't get upset. With a shrewd look at the other black players on the table, do you A, stand up and tell him not to say that around you and that you certainly will get upset? B, laugh nervously, say nothing, quietly put your fork down on the plate of food you were not finished eating and walk away with a sick knot twisting in your stomach? C, other. 12. When you tell your friends about this, Does your other close white friend say, I think we should forgive him? Does he say, you shouldn't let a word control your entire life? 13. If things are looking up, no, higher, high enough that if you look, you might break your neck. Will you forget the things down below? If you don't look at the water, will you remember to wade in it? Will you remember God's troubling? 14. When a player from the opposing team says, without a hint of malice, y'all some big niggers, you know that? How often do you use the story to get a laugh out of your friends? 15. Has the uncomfortable pit that formed in your stomach when you began reading this essay gone away yet? 16. If, in grade school, your peers regarded you as an Oreo, black on the outside, can you still say it? Should you, if it doesn't feel comfortable coming out of your lips? 17. If you look at everything with a cup half empty outlook, are you a cynic? Is designating yourself a cynic in lieu of what you once were a privilege afforded to you by happenstance? If not by happenstance, then by what? 18. The following is a game of word association. Please write in the blank the first word that comes to mind. Rule, allegory, manifest, demonize. We thank you for your participation in this moral exercise. We encourage you not to think of it again. We encourage you to take the page and tear it out and place it on a flame. We encourage you to watch the flame until it burns out as well. We encourage you to follow things to their natural conclusions. We encourage you to sift through the ashes. As ever, we are unsure what it is you will find. That's it. I think you were still muted.
I was just saying that was so powerful. That was really, really beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that piece. Can't believe it's over. I hope it wasn't. But that's all we have for today. And everyone here, please share the Adroit issue with everybody you know. And it releases on the 26th, 26th, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. It releases on the 26th. And your stories will be, is it tomorrow? Sorry. Okay. Your stories will be live and for you to read. And thank you everyone for showing up, for supporting our writers, and making this reading wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you, Kalpana, for hosting. That was incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it a lot.
That was wonderful.
So good, right?
It was so wonderful.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah.
There's just something about people reading out their stories that just makes it so much more.
They're so talented. And I just felt like I went all over the world, and then I went into these deep interior spaces. I mean,
absolutely.
It was really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love that. I love where Scholars is going. I just love we have so much good stuff.
I know.
So good.
So many, such talent. It was really exciting.
Yeah,
and then to hear Xavier, maybe Xavier's still there, read the piece, because I remember when it came into submittable, and we're like, oh,
I remember that. I know. It's not like what, how many?
This is good.
This is like we're telling him everything. But it got so many yeses. Like I think everybody said yes, right?
Yeah.
So good.
Good.
All right, I was still listening.
Yeah, we'll just praise you.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it so much. I feel really grateful for the opportunity. So
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
All right. Well, should we say goodnight? But that was
Yes, it's
wonderful. Thank
9.
you, Kalpana. You did a great job.
Thank you, Heidi. This is your second day, I think, 2 days,
Second
2 days
night,
in a
yeah.
row.
But I just, I had to host yesterday, but I'm going to stop the recording and there we go.